Are we good to go?
Great. Would you like me to kick off, Zora and team?
Hi.
Brilliant.
Rana,
okay, hello.
Just start with the introductions. Ben.
Hi, good afternoon,
Brilliant, yes.
everyone. Very warm welcome to the webinar 11 of the Mobilog series. Mobilog 2, as you all know, is a platform that brings together diverse voices from India and around the world to explore innovative, inclusive, and sustainable urban mobility solutions. Each session is designed to foster cross-learning, spark ideas, and deepen our collective understanding of the key themes shaping urban mobility. Cities worldwide are rethinking how people move by building integrated transport systems that connect public transit, walking, cycling, and emerging mobility services into a seamless whole. Transport for London, TfL, stands out as a global model of success, blending visionary planning, strong policy, and cutting-edge technology to deliver efficient and inclusive mobility. Today's session, Building Integrated Transport Systems, Learnings from TfL and others, focuses on how digital technologies and smart data are transforming public transport, from enhancing service delivery to reshaping how people access the experience mobility. We are honored to be joined by two experts with deep experience from TfL, Ben Johnson and Simon Reed. Ben is director at Flux Transport. He is a global expert in transport strategy and road safety. He has authored London's Safe Street for Transport plan and has led major policy safety initiatives across multiple countries. Simon Reed is a seasoned transport technology consultant with over 40 years of experience. At TfL, he led major projects in real-time bus tracking, passenger information systems, and smart service control. Moderating today's session is Zahra Mutabanna, an AICP certified city planner with over 18 years of global experience in transport planning and urban design. She currently leads the project support unit of the GIZ-led Sumaka project, having previously worked on TOD, NMT, and city mobility plans in India, Middle East, and this North and South America. With that, let's dive into today's conversation, and I hand over to Zora for moderating the session. Over to you, and a very warm welcome to all of you. Thank you.
Thanks, Rana. So we'll start immediately without any further ado. Ben, I would like you to please initiate your presentation and the webinar today. Thank you.
That's brilliant. Can I just check before we kick off that everybody can see the presentation? Give us a thumbs down if you can't, or mention in the chat, please.
We can see.
You can see it. Brilliant. Thank you very much. So firstly, thank you a great deal, Zora, Rana and team, for inviting Simon and I to share some of the stories that we've gathered over our experience in Transport for London and other cities. I really appreciate the offer, and it's lovely to have this conversation. So feel free to ask questions, on any of the content or things that you might want to know that maybe isn't in the content as well, and that would be great. So I'm going to start off with giving a bit of a history and introduction to TfL, explain a bit about the strategy and the policy and the governance. And then Simon, I think, is going to dive into a little bit more into more recent trends in the transport data and the customer experience piece as well. So fantastic. Without further ado then, I'm going to break mine down into sort of the role and structure. So London, its governance, the role of the mayor and how Transport for London was formed. I'm going to talk at a high level about operations policy, so how the LU system works, how the buses system works, and TfL's role in the road network, because obviously this is about integrating operations. And I'll touch briefly on customer experience as well. And then I'm going to talk a little bit about funding and financing, because these are often big constraints for transport authorities, and put London in context with some of the global cities and cities in India as well, and talk about some of the benefits of being an integrated transport authority. So just thinking about London, London's obviously the capital city of the UK. It has 20 million tourists every year. There are about 6.5 million jobs in the city. It's the HQ of 1 in 5 of Europe's biggest companies. There's 18 universities. It's about 1,500 square kilometers. There's 150 hospitals. It produces 30 megatons of CO2. There is lots going on in London, and people travel in different ways in London. They have different trip purposes. They're different A's and B's they're going from. They have different price points they can work with, traveling at different times of day. So it's a complicated system. And in the context of the UK, although there are 9 or 10 million people living in London, the daytime population is usually about 2 million people higher. And it's a much younger population than the rest of the UK. So the travel patterns of that cohort of people in the city is different to the wider country, and obviously every city has its own experience and its own set of residents that it's trying to serve. So London in context as well, just thinking about it with respect to some other major cities around the world. In many ways, it's quite similar to Delhi in area, but its transport offer is more integrated. It's similar to New York in terms of its GDP, but is kind of less densely packed than the center of New York. And it's larger than Paris as well, and Paris is a slightly less integrated operation too. So just kind of thinking about London in the context of some of those other cities. So when we look at transport and many policy topics in the UK, it's important to recognise that there are different levels at which policies set. So there's the national policy level, which is led by the Department for Transport. A lady called Heidi Alexander is the Secretary of State for Transport. And then we have the regional level. So that's the Greater London Authority, and Sadiq Khan is currently the mayor of the GLA, the Greater London Authority. And then below the level in London, there's also the boroughs in London. So the smaller administrative units in London, each with a population of about 250,000, 300,000 or 400,000 people, which often have their own mayors with varying powers. And have their own priorities locally too. So there are 3 different levels at which a policy is set, strategy is thought about, services are created. And one of the big important things that happened in the UK after the 1997 election, so nearly 30 years ago now, was that some of the powers held at a national level were devolved to the regional level. So the powers to run transport largely were devolved from national level to regional level. And the national level still run the motorway network, so the main arterial roads that connect the whole country. But lots of the regional powers were handed down to London, and so are now overseen by the mayor. And this is just a really high summary of the last 25 years or so. So the Greater London Authority Act of 1999 created TfL and handed the powers from national to regional, so to the London mayor. And the London mayor, whether that's Ken Livingstone, Boris Johnson, or Sadiq Khan, is the chair of Transport for London. So we've had 3 mayors in the history of the organisation, and each have had their own priorities, different ways of working, different things they wanted to focus on, and obviously they're delivering their powers in different contexts as well. So during the first mayoralty, there was the internet boom. There was a great deal of focus on buses and walking by Ken Livingstone, and then cycling became much more important for Boris. And Sadiq Khan has been focusing a lot on air quality and safety. So different policy priorities over those times. And it's important. The other thing I'm trying to pick out with this chart is that it has been a journey. And it's not like in 1999, sorry, the GLA Act caused TfL to come into being and it was perfectly formed. It's taken 25 years to get where we are today, and the job isn't done yet. It's had to respond to changes over time. And things have happened along the way. So the integration of something like 150 organisations that deliver transport across London into one larger organisation that is TfL today has taken 25 years, and the job still isn't over. So this isn't an act; it is a process. Okay, so those devolved powers gave the mayor different responsibilities. These are the mayor's 5 main areas of responsibility. So he runs Transport for London as the chair, the Strategic Authority for Transport. He's also responsible for policing in the capital. So he's also the chair of MOPAC, the organisation that oversees the Metropolitan Police. He's responsible for the London Fire Brigade. He's responsible for promoting London internationally. And he's also responsible for two of the largest development sites in London, so locations where development is happening, houses, commercial, etc., which are geographically defined. He is an elected mayor. There's an election every 4 years. And there are 25 assembly members, so London assembly members, who are the local representatives across London. And the Greater London Authority has about 1,000 staff to run it. So that's a smaller set of staff running the administrative politics of the city than run, for example, the Transport Authority. And we'll get onto that in a little bit of detail later too. So there are a number of in that regional, national, local picture, there are a number of really important policy structures. So one is the National Planning Policy Framework. So this is bringing planning policy together for the whole country, and that's set at the level of England. So not the United Kingdom, Scotland, Wales, Northern Ireland have separate policy frameworks, although aligned. But the National Policy Framework for England is the national level piece. And the mayor has he has other ones, but two really important documents from the perspective of his regional planning role. So one is the London Plan. So this is a spatial plan for the city. This is about land use. It's thinking about development. It sets parking standards. It identifies zones to invest in as commercial areas or residential areas. It thinks about the transport offer in the city. And then he also has the mayor's transport strategy, which sets out his vision for transport. And it's the mayor's transport strategy that drives the activity that TfL delivers. And I believe Simon's going to say a little bit more about the priorities in that. And then at the local level, there are a number of important ways that these things interconnect as well. So the mayor's transport strategy is the view of how the city's transport will serve the City of London. And each of the boroughs needs to develop its own transport strategy. So there are 33 boroughs in London, and each of them has its own what's called local implementation plan. So this is its statement to the public and its priorities for transport within its area. And those local implementation plans, the mayor has the right to withhold funding from boroughs if those local implementation plans do not align with the mayor's transport strategy objective. So he has the opportunity to withhold funding, which is a really important power. The London plan is linked to various planning guidance documents and the ways that planning will change marginally in some of those opportunity areas. So there are some local planning changes that happen that influence transport as well, that are linked to opportunity areas. And the boroughs have themselves development frameworks for spatial planning. So there's a lot of thinking goes on about spatial planning and how transport planning plugs in at the national, regional, and local level. And there are lots of ways that those policies and approaches are interleaved and codependent on one another. Because you can imagine the mayor will need powers over everything in London or influence over everything in London from a transport perspective to be able to enact some of his strategies. And so there needs to be ways for that to happen in practice. Okay, so that's the context. That's how we're working. There was a particular event in time that caused the start of Transport for London being created, that brought a load of organisations together that deliver transport in the city. There's a whole host of policy around spatial planning and transport that help the mayor deliver that activity. It's really important that the mayor is the chair of Transport for London because he's accountable to Londoners every 4 years. And that gives him a real motivation to create an excellent transport system and one that works for the city. So I'm going to talk a little bit about some of the operational modes now. So TfL has different ways that it delivers services. These are the three broad ways it delivers services. So one is it directly operates some services. So it employs the staff, it owns and maintains the assets, and it operates the assets. And then it also contracts some services. So this is where it will set up an agreement with a third party to deliver a service that Transport for London defines. So it will pay that provider to deliver the service, and it will not deliver it itself like it does in direct operations. And then the third role it has with respect to transport in the city is to license and regulate some services. So those services go about their business, but that in order to be, for example, a black cab driver, you need to have passed a certain test. Your vehicle has to hit a certain standard. And Transport for London is the organisation that establishes whether you've hit that standard and whether you pass that test. So there are 3 distinct roles that TfL has, which operate differently for different modes. So in the context of direct operations, the big one here is London Underground. So I've got another slide on this. I'll talk more shortly about that. But it also operates a system called Dial-A-Ride, which is to facilitate travel for people who have mobility challenges, so they can book services to get them to the supermarket or go on the trips they need to. It also owns and operates London's main coach station. So there's a large coach station in London, which something like 250,000 coaches a year come into. And it directly operates some river services. The services it contracts are there are more of them. So the big one here is buses. So it operates buses through contracted services. There are operators who are paid to deliver bus services based on a service requirement that TfL defines, and I'll talk a little bit more about that in a slide in a moment. It contracts out a lot of the rail systems, so the Elizabeth line, the DLR, and London's Overground network are all. So DLR's light rail, Elizabeth line is obviously the main big line that's been opened for 3 years now. And the Overground is the interurban trains that operate within the city. So those are all operated as contracted services. So we pay third parties, TfL pay, sorry, third parties to operate those services against a service requirement. And then the cycle hire and the airline, which is the cable car across the city, are also contracted out to other operators. And then in the license and regulate, I talked a little bit about taxis. So taxis and private hire are separate. The black cabs TfL view as taxis, so they are iconic for London, and they're allowed to pick up fares on the street. Private hire is a point-to-point booked service. And there's some river services as well that it licenses or regulates. So the river services come in two different models. So it's important to understand that there are different roles that TfL has with respect to different transport modes, and the skill sets you need and the number of staff you need to deliver those different roles vary according to the modes that you are delivering them. So turning to LU in a little bit more detail. So this is obviously like one of the iconic pieces about TfL, and it's an important part of TfL, and it accounts for about half of the passenger income. So the data point there for 23/4 was 2.5 of 5.2 billion in fare income, and it accounts for about 60% of the direct workforce. So there's about 2/3 in reality of people who are Transport for London employees who work on the London Underground, because TfL employ the drivers. They employ the station staff, they employ the maintenance staff, and that's not true for example, the Elizabeth line, where those people are employed by the service provider. So interestingly, although it creates a surplus in operational terms, it doesn't create a surplus after you think about renewal. So ticket prices are high in London compared to many cities, and that does generate a surplus. But when you think about renewing your vehicle fleet, renewing your assets, LU does not create a surplus, so it isn't profitable from that perspective, but operationally it is. Turning now to buses as the big contracted service. So buses provide the services that most passengers use. So there are more bus trips every day in London than there are on any other mode. And the way that works is that TfL collects all of the fare income. So our buses are cashless. So you can tap on or off with an Oyster card. You can tap on with a contactless card. You can't tap off. And TfL gets that money. And that money is then used to pay the bus operators. And there are, I think, 7 or 8 bus operators currently in London who operate the fleet of about 8,500, 9,000 buses across about 650, 700 routes. So those are all private companies who employ the drivers, who by and large own the bus stations, bus depots, and operate the services. And TfL has a different role with respect to these than they do in direct operations. So TfL has to plan the shape and size of the network, so it decides where the routes will go based on analysis. It will specify the routes in a lot of detail, so what the headways of the buses need to be, when they start in the morning, what days they run, the capacity of the vehicles, and it will set the standards for the vehicle themselves, so in terms of emissions, for example, but also in terms of safety. And then they will go through a procurement process where organizations, companies, private companies will bid for the contract. So they will offer us a price to deliver services on a route for a number of years. And TfL also operates revenue protection. So this is a group of people who are going around the network, checking people's tickets and issuing charge notice, penalty notices if they haven't got an appropriate ticket. It manages network incidents, and the London Bus Control Centre is co-located with the Traffic Control Centre. There's also tunnel operators and Metropolitan Police in that same facility, so they're integrated in the operational day-to-day running of the network. And critically, TfL will manage the operator's performance, so they will gather data from the units in the buses to understand how the operator is delivering against the performance requirement, and payment will happen on the basis of that delivery. So the contracts allow for TfL to withhold payment if the service hasn't been delivered in the way the contract requires. And the key part there is that the data is shared across those organizations, so everybody is looking at the same data. And TfL looks after the infrastructure, so manages the bus lanes, manages the bus stops. So the third kind of big one that I want to cover is the road network. There are 13,000 kilometers of roads in London, and TfL has responsibility for, both in terms of maintaining the assets and in terms of operating the roads, only 5% of those, so about 580 kilometers on what's called the Transport for London road network. And broadly speaking, if you go to London, you'll see that the Transport for London road network has red lines down the side, whereas the borough road network, so all of the boroughs have their own roads as well, have yellow lines down the side. So you can imagine that although that's only 5% of the road network, they are the strategic roads. So they're the main roads in London, and they carry something like 28 or 30% of the traffic flow. Now, because London needs to have strategic management of the traffic at a city level, not just on the strategic road network, it also manages and maintains all of the traffic signals in London. So there are about 6,000 traffic signals in London, and Transport for London owns and operates all of those to manage the network, and obviously tracks performance on the network, both on its own roads, those 580 kilometres, but other roads as well, because TfL has an interest in the performance of roads, not just from the traffic perspective, but also from the buses perspective. So it needs to have control of traffic signals in order to manage flows on the networks of interest. One of those is the bus network. TfL manages roadworks. It undertakes enforcement, for example, a speed camera network and a red light camera network for when people break the speed limit or go through a red light. It manages enforcement around junction behaviours, yellow box junctions, and it operates a number of camera-based schemes, including the low emission zone, the ultra low emission zone, something called the direct vision standard, which is about truck safety, and something called the safer lorry scheme, which is also about truck safety. So it manages a number of camera assets and enforcement around the city as well, and obviously operates the congestion charge in the centre of the city. So there's a lot going on the road network, and the road network also generates some revenue, for example, from congestion charging. Not so much for parking. In reality, the boroughs generate quite a lot of revenue for parking, but TfL does not. So one of the important aspects of TfL's development over the last 25 years that's allowed it to influence what's going on in transport in the city is its control of fare income. And this slide just picks out some of the kind of steps along that evolution. But it's really important that TfL manages fare income, so it collects the fares, because that gives it influence over both planning for the future, but also what happens to the operations. So the fact that it's centrally collecting the fares is a really important aspect of TfL's activity. So in the mid-90s, there was a whole host, a wide range of ticketing. You had to get different tickets for buses and tube. They were largely paper. Then in 2003, the Oyster card was introduced by TfL. So it wasn't the first place that this type of technology was used, but it was the largest at the time. And that offered a gate line tap in on the LU system, tap off system, which customers could just readily use to get onto different modes and interchange smoothly. And then that transitioned over a little bit to contactless. So rather than using the Oyster card itself, although that is still active, one of the benefits of using contactless is there isn't a card asset to manage, and you're just buying transport like you buy other products and services. So that has really grown. Contactless has really replaced Oyster over the past 4 or 5 years. And one of the things that TfL has been focused on in the past 3 or 4 years is expanding out that contactless network to the rail system outside of London. So obviously lots of London rail users are commuters who are getting on at a station that's outside of Transport for London's control and coming into the city and exiting in the city. And so bringing those into the aegis of Transport for London and creating a seamless system for those 2 million people who are coming into the city every day has been an important aspect of what TfL's been focusing on in the last couple of years as well. So Simon is going to touch a little bit more on customer experience. So this slide is really just picking up the complexity of information that we need to share. So there's a whole host of stuff that we share to help people move around London. Obviously, people are moving around London for different reasons. There are lots of aspects of customer experience that focus on transport information. So when the next bus will be, what the schedule is, whether there are delays. There are lots of help points on the system for people to access, a personal conversation. Bottom left, you can see that this isn't just about public transport. There's also information we provide on street. So that's a pedestrian information board there. And there's information we provide to visitors. There's a whole host of stuff that goes on in terms of travel information through the website and through online options. So TfL Go is the journey planning app in London. You can plan journeys on the website as well. There's live travel information showing you how the service is running. And there's a lot of information provided as well through APIs to third parties, so that actually we're kind of freeing that data so that if other people have uses for it, they can take advantage of it as well. So this is just one example of how that comes together for a particular location. So Stratford is a station in East London. It became well known around the world in 2012 because it was the station closest to the Olympic Stadium in East London in Stratford, and has since evolved into a commercial and office centre. But at the time, it was focusing on the Olympics. And there are a variety of different rail services run by TfL and run by not TfL that coalesce in Stratford. So there are 2 underground lines, the Central Line and the Jubilee Line. There's the Docklands Light Railway. So this is an overground light railway system that was introduced in the mid to late 80s to allow transport expansion to the east of the city in a more cost-effective way than building new underground lines. There's London Overground. So that's those trains that operate within the city that aren't the tube. There's the Elizabeth Line, which goes west to east across the city, with the central section being undergrounded, but that's really heavy rail rather than an underground line. So that stops here as well. And there is actually an international station at Stratford, which, although you can't board to get onto Paris, does have high-speed services into St Pancras in central London. And then there's National Rail. So National Rail is the rail that largely is used by the commuter population. So this is the National Rail network that's operated by organisations affiliated with the DfT rather than organisations affiliated with TfL. So many times the actual rail network will be the same that we use. Sometimes it won't, but that's the National Rail system where the large surface stations in London, like Liverpool Street and Waterloo and King's Cross and Paddington, which are managed by an organisation called Network Rail that's overseen by the DfT. So we have to integrate service offer and operations with them at this particular location in Stratford. There's also a whole host of bus services at Stratford. There are, I think, two bus stations there, one that serves the local services and one that serves more city services. There's cycle hire and taxi rank. So this all comes together in one station so that the interchange penalty for travellers is sought to be minimised. And the station operations, the operating staff for those different teams running those different rail services have regular meetings to talk about the challenges they're facing and integrate any changes in their systems that are occurring in the coming time period. So I'm going to turn just briefly to funding and financing. So this slide is just trying to capture some lovely graphic out of a TfL publication about a year ago. It's just trying to capture the complexity of this system. So there are many assets that Transport for London needs to maintain, needs to monitor, needs to operate, and the funding and finances of the organisation, either directly as an operator and maintainer of those assets, or indirectly, is really important aspect of what TfL does. And you can see there's a whole host of things from road structures, including bridges, to IT systems, to buses, to bus stops, to track on the Docklands Light Railway, to fabrication assets for supporting LU and things like that. So there's a whole range of engineering activity linked to the assets. So Transport for London, this is data from I think 23-24. Transport for London has about 10.3 billion of income every year. The biggest single income item is passenger fare income. So that's about half of all of TfL's income. And on one level, I mentioned in the case of LU, operationally, TfL runs London Underground at a surplus. But when you account for some of the things TfL has to do over the fullness of time to keep that service running, that isn't actually a surplus. So of that 10.3 billion, about half of it is passenger income. Some of it is to do with the relationship we had with the Department for Transport in bringing Crossrail together. So we have some income from that. There's a whole host of income around grants. So one of the things that's really important from an integration perspective is that the mayor is TfL's chairman, and the mayor has income coming into the Greater London Authority that he can choose to spend on different activities. So he can choose to spend it on policing, he can choose to spend it on development, he can choose to spend it on commercialising activity in London through different agencies he has. And some of it he chooses to spend on Transport for London to support the transport network, because he rightly recognises that the city will not succeed if the transport network isn't serving the city. So it's really important for the mayor that the transport system operates in a way that's coherent for the City of London. And so some of the grant funding comes from the GLA, so from Londoners who pay taxes and from people who shop in London who pay money that ultimately businesses pay as taxes as well. So there's both direct taxation and indirect taxation on people in the city. And some of that comes back to TfL as grants. So that's about half of the passenger income. There's other funding associated with particular capital projects. So when we're building something, or sometimes when we're purchasing vehicles that have a 30 or 40-year lifespan, like tube trains, the government will step in and support that funding, support that with some funding as well. And then there's other income around advertising and around property and around various other activities that makes up the rest of it. So I think the key message to take away there is that about 12% of that income, about half of it's from fares, and ultimately about 12% of it is spent on renewing and improving the network. So it's not just about operating. And when you think about the costs, obviously the big item here is the operating costs. So remember, we were talking about direct employment of LU staff, but indirect contracting of bus services. So they would all come into operating costs. So that's money that's coming out of the business to operate the services. And then, so that's by far the biggest.
Sorry,
I'm
we're at
nearly there.
halftime. I just wanted. Yeah.
Brilliant, thank you. I'm nearly through now. So yeah, so that's by far the biggest cost, as you would expect. And about 1.1 billion is on new capital investment. So that's where we're spending money to build things or buy new trains to develop the network. And then there's obviously some smaller aspects in terms of Places for London, which is mentioned there. So Places for London is TfL's property arm. TfL is the second largest landowner in the city after, I think, the royal household. And one of the things it's been seeking to do more recently is to turn some of that turn some of that land into revenue streams. So there is a housing challenge in the city and in the country more generally. So TfL is trying to free up some of its land or develop some of its existing land to create housing and commercial units. So, for example, one of TfL's main offices is just south of the river in London, near Waterloo Station. And I think planning was recently granted for the station that's just outside of that office to have something like 7 or 8 stories built on top of it, so that revenue can be generated from rental income from that property. So the cost of doing that, building those assets into revenue streams, is what that Places for London capital investment talks to. Okay, I just wanted to talk briefly about debt. So one of the things that Transport for London has been able to do, which its predecessor organisations had less ability to do, is to borrow money. So if you just work back to this one, you'll see that net interest costs is 0.4 billion. So that's 400 million pounds per year, and that's interest on debt that TfL has. The TfL has about 13.5 billion pounds of debt, which is about 2.5 times its annual fare income. So I thought it'd be useful to kind of throw together a quick chart comparing some cities across the world and also some Indian cities where I'm a bit less sure on the data, to have a look at how leveraged some of these organizations are. So TfL it's not struggling under its debt, but it's getting to a point where it accounts for about 8% of its fare income, and to service that debt every year. And so every year, 1 in 12 pounds is being spent servicing the debt. And one of the challenges TfL has is balancing what's the right number there, because it wants to enhance the network. It wants to borrow money to, to buy new things and build new assets and create new services. But it's constrained by the fare income it can bring in, and its borrowing costs are constrained by how it's perceived in the commercial markets as well. So I just thought it'd be interesting to compare how that debt looks compared to some other cities, and actually it's much less leveraged than many cities, which was a bit of a surprise to me. So looking at LA Metro, which is part of LA Metro's challenge, is that it doesn't receive as much fare income. And so the challenge is that's a greater proportion, 16 times the multiplier. But then I looked at some Indian cities, and there are some real challenges there. These are more about the metro systems because of the lower levels of integration of transport in Indian cities, generally speaking. But they are very highly leveraged on a narrow level. So I think there's a really interesting challenge in India about how to balance the investment with the servicing of the debt. Okay, so just a few key achievements. I've touched on most of these on the way through, but ticketing's a big one. Used to be separate tickets. Now there's Oyster and contactless. It's a much smoother experience for customers. It's a cheaper ticket to issue, cheaper asset to manage. So there's a lot of efficiency in that, as well as lots of really good customer information coming out of it. Journey information, because they weren't integrated, there wasn't a great deal of integration operationally, so it's difficult to communicate that to customers. Now the planning happens in a much more coordinated way through things like the London Plan and the MTS, and the journey information could be multimodal, so it can help people from end to end rather than just that bit of their train journey or that bit of their bus journey. There's been massive increases in investment around sustainable travel. So not just the bus network as a sustainable mode, but also cycling and urban realm creation has thrived under the Integrated Transport Authority model. Developments, there's been a lot of change in that space. So developments are part of a wider London plan now, rather than just being a local consideration, with little thinking about how the impact of those developments would challenge, transport operations going forward. So, if you're a local authority and you used to have power to just approve a planning development, approve a development, you weren't thinking about the wider impacts of that on the city, but now that happens. And financial coordination. So TfL business plans as one entity. So it brings together the finances of all those different modes and does that planning as one entity together. And there are efficiencies there. There's cross subsidies. There's ways to value engineer things. So that's been a massive thing as well. And I just want to. There are some challenges, but I'll jump over that because of the time. I just wanted to have some final thoughts. So one is around serving your city. So I think it's really important that the mayor has these two roles. He's the mayor of London, but he's also the chair of TfL. And if you want to phone up London, you know who to call. You call the mayor. And I think it's really important that he has this dual role because it allows him to direct Transport for London to do what his transport authority needs to do to generate the city that he wants. So what's London for? Well, it's for lots of things, but largely it's about bringing people together for financial and professional services. That's where the gross value add of London is. So he needs a transport system that's going to deliver that. And he has the power to do that because he is both mayor of the city and also chair of the transport authority. And then the second one is about planning, working and succeeding and failing together. So Transport for London has one voice about transport in London, whether it's to do with cycle lanes or bus contracts or discussions with unions about employment in London Underground. It's doing that with one voice. So it's doing its thinking internally across these modes and across these different aspects, and then it's presenting that externally. So there are no kind of public fights about whether we should have a bus lane here or a new rail station, because those discussions are happening at a management level rather than a public level. And I think having that planning function together, not just the business planning, but the network planning, the operational planning, is really, really powerful. So doing that inside together as different modes, doing different things, but coming out with one solution that is balanced across your objectives. The third key point, I think, is measure what matters. So it's really important to understand what's going on your network. But in today's world, it can be really tempting to just gather a load of data, but measure what matters and make sure it's trustworthy and there's quality in it and you know what it means when it goes up and down, and then you have an opportunity to manage it. So it's really important to understand what's happening on your network and not get bogged down into changes in time. And one of the really powerful surveys that happens in London is called the London Travel Demand Survey. So this has been a survey that's going on for 25 years, which is understanding travel patterns of Londoners. And so it's really easy to see, how we are now compared to how we were 10 years ago and what the trends are that are important for us to follow. And the final point is today and tomorrow are everything. So it's really important to deliver a fantastic service today, on your mode with your integrated transport authority, but actually you need to be thinking about what's coming next, because you have a chance to respond to that and to plan for that. And there's been lots of examples in London where something has come along where we've had to respond to it. And sometimes TfL had planned really well for it, and other times it hadn't. The pandemic was a real challenge, so that created lots of problems that TfL wasn't really prepared for. Also, Uber created really some challenges that TfL wasn't really prepared for. But there are other things TfL has done. So it's embraced technology really brilliantly. So it has planned for the future. So thinking about the world you're moving into is really important as well. So operations today, understanding what's happening next and planning for that. And I just wanted to finish on one little quote. This is my last bit, which is by a gentleman called Peter Druckner, who was an Austrian kind of management guru. And his quote is, "Culture eats strategy for breakfast." And what I mean by that is that you can have all these great plans, but unless you're working together, unless you're thinking in a way that services some of those final thoughts at the top there, you're working together to deliver things, and you're planning for the future, and you know what it is you need to measure, and you understand how your transport authority delivers for your city and what it needs to do to deliver for your city. Unless you're working in that cultural way, then having all your plans and stuff won't get you to the place you need to be. So it's the way of working that's really important, doing that in a collaborative way and not necessarily having the right plans. Thank you.
Thank you so much, Ben. That was really enlightening to a lot of us. So I'll request Simon to go next. And meanwhile, Ben, there are questions in the Q&A section. I invite everybody to actually post their question in the Q&A. So Ben, if you have some time, you could respond to the questions right there. So we'll save some time in the end in bringing the questions up. Simon, all yours.
Good afternoon. I hope you can hear me okay. Is that all right? Good. Fantastic. And has the screen refreshed for everybody? So you should have a different presentation up there. First of all, thank you very much, Ben. I worked for TfL for 19 years and I'm still learning things. So thank you very much for Ben's presentation. And for those of you really paying attention, there's a few of these points that I'm going to cover which rely on the introduction that Ben's given there to the way that TfL is maintained. I mean, quite simply, post-COVID, with a climate crisis, hugely changing attitudes to mobility, the pressure to deliver public transport services has never been higher. Now, Ben has just described both the political, structural and strategic objectives that are, or sorry, strategic structure of TfL and how it comes together. I'm going to go a little bit different. I'm going to go and look at it from the customer perspective and perhaps show some of the technology that we've used in the bus service in London to deliver that. And quite interestingly, that model is now being encouraged by central government to be used in other cities around around the UK. So I haven't got a massive amount of time, so I will be jetting through a little bit of this. Ben, if you remember, started off showing us the political levels and the strategic documents that run through this, one of which is the Mayor's Transport Strategy. And although it was first published in 2018, revised in 2022, it really sets out the purpose of transport. It's not about moving people from A to B. It's moving people from A to B so that you can have healthy streets and healthy people, a safe environment. The good public transport experience has got to be there. That's absolutely true. But why? What is the purpose of the transport? Why is it where it is? Why is it needed? Ben mentioned collecting the data. We need to be able to see where people are moving from and to, what is driving that mobility, and what services need to be put in place. Just roll that back a little bit. You know, there was a time when it was assumed that everything would be done by private transport. People's aspirations were to have bikes, motorbikes and cars. In London, from successive mayoral policies, we're now at a situation where the car is unwanted in the central area at all. It is public transport and urban sort of domain, a domain space where the private car and private transport is actually a burden to ownership in the middle of town. So aspiration is no longer about living in the city, having a car, moving about the city. It's living in the city and enjoying everything the city can offers, but augmented by a strong, powerful public transport experience. I just put some of these things in. I mean, Ben mentioned the fact in 2012 we had the Olympics. The Olympics was done with absolutely no private car parking or any sort of facilities at all. It was a completely public transport Olympics, first time it had ever been attempted. So it was a really exciting exemplar of how that strategy was put to place. And that stayed with us, I think, ever since. But let's look at what the customers are doing now. This was just a chart. I'm sure every authority that's represented here today has got this chart that said COVID happened and then we recovered. It looks like it's sort of almost recovered. This was ended in 2023. It came out in the annual report, but it looks like it sort of recovered very, very well and things would be going in the right direction. Actually, that misses some really, really important points. It's extremely nuanced now. There was a time when using public transport was actually said it was something that the government encouraged people not to do because of the COVID risk. So you literally had posters telling people not to use public transport. With COVID over, people would, you had to actively encourage them back to use the public services. But what had happened, of course, was that everything else had changed as well. The situation that we're living in now is not the same as it was pre-2020. And we've now got these new factors coming in. GDP growth has not been brilliant in the UK. Inflation, as you can see there, has had a massive spike in recent years. There's the economic inactivity is now being tracked by most economists. We have a lot of people who are removing themselves from the work market, and that a lot of that is seen as being part of the COVID experience, where people started working from home and have felt disenfranchised from going back into society and are no longer contributing in the way that they were. And the last graph on there is energy prices. So what's happening here is volatility. So to try and run a transport network in the way that you did before COVID is not right in today's world. So if I look at the way that it's now being run, it's probably the model is the same, but the speed of change has to be much more dynamic. So this is really the model that we're using, and this particular presentation is about how we do the customer side of it. The customer is at the center of the operating model. So everything else, the four blobs around the side, are really a circular function that says how we run, particularly, I mean, I'll focus today just because of the time on the bus network, but that whole idea of we plan the services. Ben mentioned the bus service is franchised. It's got several operators, so it goes to a commercial procurement loop, goes into operations. TfL monitors the performance, and that feeds our service plan again. So the schedule that we want to do is published to the customer, real time, where the vehicles are, etc. And then you get the performance side of it, where we explain to people how well things are run, and that's what we use to actually challenge the bus operators through their piece. So how do we do that? In London, we have the concept of iBus, which is a central system that TfL have invested in that has fits on every single vehicle that's out there. You'll notice on the front of this picture, there's the word Arriva, which is one of our bus operators, as Ben mentioned. So every bus in London is red. It's got the TfL logos on it, but it's actually run by an independent company. Some of the companies are very, very small. The largest has got over 2,500 vehicles. But the customer doesn't need to know that. From the customer's perspective, you just want to go on using your normal chosen method of payment and have the same information and travel experience regardless of who's underneath. The iBus concept is really a lot of technology that enables that smooth behavior to be delivered for you. I'm not going to go into any great detail in this, except this is just more detail that Ben just touched on earlier of each of the individual operators, how their role is defined, what they have to do, as opposed to what TfL does. And there's just a bit more of a broken down view on how that's put through there. It's just a little bit more detail. So how does this iBus system work? What does it actually do, and how does it hold this information together? Well, I think most people who have done anything with public transport will imagine that there is each of your vehicles is providing its location information into a back office system. But really what we're doing is taking the reference data, which is owned and created by the authority, feeds into that system, excuse me, and then the information that comes out of it is what we then give on to the customers. So if you've got a bus that's going down the road, what it's constantly doing is recalculating its arrival time on all of the downstream stops. And that's the information that goes out to the customer. So before the journey, if you think about anybody's individual journey, you want to say, when should I take a bus to go from A to B? That's effectively looking at the schedules. But what you want when you get to the bus stop, or when you're thinking about going to the bus stop, is where is it in reality? Because the schedule is likely to be affected by operational conditions of the day. That data is also the same data set is used not only for the real-time passenger information, but it's used by TfL to monitor the operator's performance and for reporting for external purposes in terms of how many kilometers were operated, frequency of operation, etc., and so on. So it's all effectively run off that one system. I won't spend a great deal of time on it, but there is a whole range of infrastructure that runs behind this. There's a radio system. There is a control, as Ben mentioned, there's a control center in the within TfL that provides emergency cover for this. And there is a single back office system and database that runs all of this information that all of these parties have a look at. The main point I want you to take away from this, though, is that there is only one source of truth for all of the bus information. So it isn't a question that there's a separate system for the passenger information that there is for when we're monitoring the operator. It is all one IT system. It is all one business system. Even though there are several different bus operators, it is one system, and that way you can get the same experience to the customer no matter who is actually operating that service. And that's been quite a trick to get right. And it has taken, as Ben was describing, TfL has taken 25 years of its journey so far. This has taken a good 10 to 15 years to get this sorted to the level that it is now. So what do you get? It's a common source of bus information, on-street signs, and so on. Why do you want to have good, accurate information? Well, it's to remove the uncertainty, encourage turn up and go behavior rather than people having to look for the schedule. And it's a major driver of customer satisfaction. Now, it's often an objective of senior managers to get good customer satisfaction. But one of the things that I think TfL did very well was to try to understand that it's more than just providing next bus information. If you actually look at what customers really want, you end up with graphs not dissimilar to this, that their satisfaction is driven by these factors. And if you weight them, you end up with similar numbers. It does vary by region as to exactly, which things in each territory people would find more attractive. But if you look at it, time, that's the journey time and time waiting to catch the bus, is sort of 25 to 30% of all of your customer satisfaction scores. So it's not just convenience to tell people when the bus is coming, it really drives your customer satisfaction. And why is that important? Because it goes back to your funding model. As Ben was saying earlier, if TfL was seen to be failing, the mayor has got the option to reduce funding. Central government has the option to reduce funding. So the reason that TfL spends so much time in trying to get this stuff accurate is not just it's good to have accurate systems to tell people about, but it really is part of the virtuous circle of funding for the organisation. Just a couple of graphs. So I appreciate we're running out of time. So a couple of graphs there, just sort of showing you some of the information that we also do for post-journey use. So you can, by all means, go and look this afternoon if you want. Go onto TfL's website and look at bus performance figures, and you will find all of the figures for each operator is publicly available, and it's published every quarter. So you can see whether the bus network is getting better, whether it's got more responsive, whether there's an individual operator who does the job better than others. You can see all of that information. It's published and in the public domain. I would encourage you to do that. So just to finish up then, the customer is at the center of the operating model for TfL with the schedule, real time, and this performance and transparency information. And that's all come out of successive mayoral strategies looking to enhance London and enhance its operation. I think that will do in the time period that we've got. We've got questions to go through. So I think I will conclude there and hand back to you if that's okay.
Thank you, Simon. That was a quick presentation. I appreciate you being so meticulous about the time. We do have some questions here, and Ben has been kind enough to answer some of them. So I'll go over some that have not yet been answered. This is a question by Freya Pierce. When you say measure what matters, how does the city kind of decide whose experience to focus on, especially in a diverse city such as London? How does the data currently reflect that diversity, and how can you move towards a more inclusive data gathering strategy? Ben, do you want to take that?
Yeah, I've just pinged a few words across to Iran as well. So there's a couple of aspects here. So TfL tracks how the people using its services feel about the services. So it's kind of like a popularity score in a way. Do you trust TfL? How much do you trust TfL is an important question. And so that's one level. It's not about kind of performance metrics of the network. It's just about overall how people are feeling. TfL also has a whole host of operational metrics that go onto a public scorecard. So you can go onto the internet and find TfL's scorecard that will publish against key themes it has as an organization. So you can look at the things that it's using to measure its own performance and track those through time. And those tend to be things that are not related to journey purpose, for example. So people are traveling for different reasons. They tend to be about operational issues. So journey time reliability on the network, on the road network, is really important. Excess wait time in buses. So, those are experiences that everybody has a positive and a negative view about. Nobody wants their bus to be late. Nobody wants their journey to be unreliable. So regardless of your journey purpose, those things are positive or negative. It also kind of tracks those things over time. So I think useful to have a look at the scorecard and see what the metrics are that it tracks. But there are a whole host of things to do with operations, safety, our performance, TfL's performance as an organisation with respect to diversity and finances. So they're just the levers that TfL has that allow it to manage its wide range of activity.
Great. Thanks, Ben. And I think that answered your question, Freya. Simon, do you have anything else to add to that since you were speaking about the commuter experience? I think this
No,
also relates to.
I mean, I think you're right. That's the measured view of it. But I think the thing that perhaps I should have stressed at the start of my presentation really is that customer attitudes have really changed, really, really changed. It was only in 2009-10 when we last let the contract that dealt with bus display screens at roadside. And there was no concept of the iPhone because it wasn't launched until November 2010. But it immediately made our thoughts that messages would be provided by SMS only was sort of like completely taken away. So people's customer satisfaction, they started seeing apps with other things on. I said, well, why isn't TfL doing this? And we took the decision to publish our data and let other people build apps for it. But it was literally a 18 month to 2 year window when your perception as to how customers would consume information completely tipped on its head, completely. And I think, it's very difficult for any organization to do a complete spin on some of its services when a disruptive technology came along. And as Ben said earlier, we had exactly the same thing when a new service level came in. How do you maintain your customer satisfaction when something like Uber comes in and tips the delivery model over, or when COVID came in and tips the whole city health operation over? So it's very difficult to track your objective scorecards and things like that when you get disruptive things coming through like that. But I think it's just a fact of life. And as transport professionals, we just have to get used to it and modify our thing going forward. Where you fail is if you, as I mentioned in my presentation, where you fail is if you think that post something like COVID, you were somehow or other going to end up with a situation back the day before COVID hit. That's where you fail. You have to keep modifying your business and your measures. So that's what Ben meant by measuring the right thing. You have to keep changing to make that work.
Great. Thanks, Simon. We have 4 more questions. I'll try and take 2 more if we have 5 minutes more to speak. Is that okay with you, Ben and Simon? Are you okay with 5 more minutes?
Yep.
Yeah. All right. Okay. So I'll go to the next question. There's a question on the pod network that was there at the Heathrow Airport and had plans to grow. I think that has been answered. Okay, so I'll move to the next question. Is advertising a significant source of revenue for TfL?
Yes, it is a significant source of revenue. I mean, it doesn't compete with fare revenue. I think it's Simon can perhaps correct me if I'm wrong here, but I think it's in the sort of 150 million to 200 million kind of range. And obviously that's adverts on roadside boards, it's on bus stops, it's on our website. There's a whole host of places on the buses themselves and the rail services themselves. So advertising does happen. One of the things that TfL has done over the last 5 or 6 years is move from kind of managing its own advertising asset to outsourcing that. So effectively effectively TfL has sold the operations and the rights to sell the advertising space that it has. So it is a big owner of advertising space. And instead of managing that asset itself, it has sold the management of that assets to third parties who can then focus with their advertising expertise on, how to optimize income. So there's an opportunity for them to make a margin over and above what we would make for them to pay back to TfL for the use of that asset. So that securitizes the income for us in a nice way because we can write that contract in such a one can write a contract in such a way that even if the advertising market dips, the income still gets generated by TfL. Whereas if TfL was managing its own marketing asset, it would face that dip in the market. So there's some trade-offs to be done there in terms of securitizing income versus optimizing income, if you like.
Great, thanks, Ben. So this next question is it's a little difficult, but I'll still try and pitch this to you. This question says that in most cities in India, metro rail and bus services are operated by different agencies which have their own independent strategies to serve their interests, and rightly so. Ben, Simon, please share your thoughts on enabling a synergy between the two.
I'm happy to make a start on that, Simon, if that's right with you. So this actually links into the following question, I think, around kind of enforcement mechanisms for private operators. So when I said serve your city, so this is about what your city needs out of its transport network. And if you have, as an integrated authority, if you have the power and agency to generate those operated services, whether you're directing your own staff and assets to deliver them, or whether you're procuring them through a contract to deliver them, you get the opportunity to sidestep some of those challenges in that question. So you can force the bus system to serve the rail system for last mile, let's call it, in a way that you wouldn't be able to if those two were separately operating organizations. And with respect to the enforcement, TfL sets the schedules for the buses. So it says there needs to be a bus every 8 minutes down this corridor. There needs to be 3 buses an hour down this corridor. And it has the ITS kit on the bus to measure whether or not the operator is delivering that. And this isn't, this was rocket science, I think, when TfL started doing it. It's not quite rocket science anymore. But that metric feeds into the contract. So if the operator is not supplying that service, they will not get paid for the service that they're not supplying. So I think it's really important to have that control. And part of that control is delivered through TfL getting the fares. So if your operator gets the fares and, you have some agreement that the operator will pay you back some of that money, like a net cost contract, some proportion of the fares, then the money sits with the operator and they get to sit on that money until they execute the action to move it to your bank account. Whereas if you're TfL and you get the fares, you get that choice. But it's an institutional challenge, this. In India, the experience I've had from looking at the Indian bus market is that, for example, the state transport undertakings, because they're not operating at a surplus, they're reliant on the state funding to be able to run the services. And if the state funding is late and the state transport undertaking is paying a service provider to operate the services, the SCU doesn't get the money, the operator doesn't get the money, the buses stop, because the operator isn't employing drivers or paying for assets for no benefit. It needs to be paid for that. And so the institutions need to be lined up in a way that sometimes doesn't work as well in India as it might. And I think that's a real challenge, having surety around the contract and payment terms and, clarity on delays of payment and clarity on performance metrics is all really integral to the system running smoothly. Everybody needs to understand what their role is and when they get paid what for delivering their role. And I think that's one of the things that TfL has definitely got right, and that is a real challenge to deliver in a complicated environment that is, the various transport organizations with their different objectives in a modern Indian city.
Simon, do you have anything to add?
Yeah, I mean, we do have this model in places in the UK where exactly this has happened. So outside of London and outside of there's Manchester and now Leeds and Liverpool are all going down the same route that London has got. But up until that point, as Ben was saying, all the bus services are completely independent. And although when Ben was describing the rail networks as being run by a national conglomerate, they are actually all franchised out in a very similar way to the London bus network. So you do end up with exactly the problem you've described, that buses decide to knock off at 8 o'clock in the evening because it's no longer profitable. Now, there's been various drivers to try and sort that out. There was incentive schemes introduced. What it tends to come down to, though, is somebody putting some money on the table and saying to the private bus operator, right, if you're happy that you can run them to 8 o'clock, then there might be some other services that are funded by the local authority to extend that, or to provide some of that integration that you were describing between bus and rail. But it's not worked particularly well, which is why now, since the what's called the Bus Services Act, they've changed the regulations so other cities can follow the London model, and they are pretty well queuing up to do it. So the West Midlands, which is Birmingham, West Yorkshire, which is Leeds, Liverpool, Manchester, are all following the same route as London to get back control as to how their services are run.
Just to build on that finally as well, Sam, so, and this is why the transport being linked to the city is really important, because in London, the mayor has the power to collect taxes from Londoners and from businesses in London and give that to the transport authority so that the buses run after 8 p.m. because then, you know, they're not profitable then, but then they're nevertheless needed for the running of the city. And so as a result, bringing that kind of city view together and forcing it into the transport system through the subsidies that are generated from taxes that are paid by Londoners and businesses in London is the way that circle is squared.
That is great to know. Actually, very interesting, and a great example for us as well in India. So I think we are at 5:10 now, and there are a lot of questions. So what we can do is we can share these questions with our panelists, and we will ask them to respond them over email, and we will, in our email that we'll respond to, we will try and have these questions responded to as well. So meanwhile, I would like to thank the panelists. Thank you so much for joining us. This was a great discussion, so much to learn, and being in the sector of transportation for so long, we still had so much to learn. So thank you again, panelists. And now I'll hand it over to Rana to conclude the session.
Thank you, Zora. So today's discussion highlighted how integrated transport systems, when backed with by strong policy, smart technology, and user-focused planning, can transform cities, move, and thrive. The experience from London offered valuable lesson as Indian cities continue their journey towards seamless, inclusive, and future-ready mobility networks. A big thank you to all our participants for joining us today for thoughtful questions and engagement. Thank you to our speakers and Zora for moderating. One last thing which I would request our audience is to please help us decide which topic to be taken up next in the webinar. So please suggest. And accordingly, as per the poll, we'll take the next webinar 12 for this Mobilog series. Just stay tuned for our upcoming sessions as we continue to explore critical themes and innovative shaping urban mobility in India and around the world. Until next time, I would thank you. Please stay safe and keep moving forward.
Thank you. Thank you, everyone.
Thank you, everyone. Thank you.
Thank you very much.